Welcome to the Golden State Media Concepts Sex Podcast, a show that examines all aspects of sexuality, from physical to emotional to spiritual. Join our hosts as they discuss age-old questions, common misconceptions, and the latest topics surrounding sex. They'll tackle topics about sexuality from the complicated to the hilarious and everything in between. GSMC Sex Podcast is your show for all of your questions about sex, even some you might not have thought of yet.
Hello and welcome to Golden State Media Concepts Sex Podcast. I'm your host, John Johnson. I'm going to talk about when strangers become unstrangers in a sexual way. If you can imagine, how could we describe this? Sometimes in the experience with someone in a sexual way, there is that unknown. And when you're being acquainted for the first time, or maybe being reacquainted, we have this transition that we make. I mean, it's great when you know each other, everything is familiar, those things are nice. And sometimes, especially when it's brand new, it's nice because you're now anticipating something fresh and new and exciting. Because I think by that time you already know what you think it's supposed to be, and then there's that anticipation of what's coming next. Imagine jumping off of a diving board, and as you're heading towards the water, and I'm talking a high dive now because you really need some time to experience this. So you're jumping off that high dive, and whether it's head first or feet first, there's that vast nothingness, and you're looking to fill it with something. Right now, it's full of anticipation, and you have quite a bit of time before you land on the water. Like I say, you know the diving board part because you jumped up and down in life, and you know what it feels like to be in water. But like I say, that vast space. And it might even be more exciting if you were jumping out of an airplane where you are now rushing towards the ground before you slow your descent with the parachute. See, sex has that type of intensity with it. It gives you, and if you've had sex, I mean, if you've never had it, then go catch one of my other podcasts because I talk about sex for the first time. But in this one, I'm talking about you've had it, maybe you've laid off for a while, and now you're looking to reconnect. It's having strangers become unstrangers. Now, there are a number of scenarios in which something like this can happen, and I'm going to give you an example. If you're somebody who is, say, has traveled a while, you've been away from your partner for a long time, that's an example. If you're a person who, let's say you've been in a hospital, and again, there's an example where you may not have necessarily been away from your partner for a long time, but you may not have been capable of performing sexually. So there's going to be a little bit of anticipation when something like that, sex is going to be back on the agenda, and it comes back. You know, those are some simple scenarios in which you can already be familiar with the person, but, you know, when you've had time off, there's a little bit of the stranger part going on, but they're still fun, and there still could be some anticipation. Now, if you're with a brand new person, I think we already have in our minds the idea that this is going to be good. You're anticipating it. You want it to be fun. It's not necessarily a do-over. When you're in the other scenario, the one that I just mentioned, sometimes there's an element of do-over. You may have had, like I say, time away. It could be from traveling. It could be that the relationship could have gone through some issues, but you're back in the sack. But when you're first starting out, you've never had sex with this person, and you're thinking about how much fun it's going to be. There's obviously been the flirtation and stuff that's gone back and forth. You've talked about sex. You've talked about what it's like been with exes. You may have even had the conversation of what you like, what you don't like. You may have had shared notes with each other. You've done the whole courtship thing and really anticipating what this is going to be like. We're not necessarily strangers anymore because we have been doing this dialogue, doing this dance, this back and forth, and now we're building the anticipation to have the event, to be sexual. Embrace it. Then there's the people who like to do things totally spontaneous. They're not necessarily strangers, but they try something new. They're doing it outside under the stars. They say, you know what, we're going to take a camping trip. They might even do it out on the beach, late at night, take a trip somewhere, do it out in the middle of the park, or even, you got to be careful about doing things out in the public, at least even in your own car. Who knows who may be watching you, and there's cameras everywhere, not just cell phones, but I mean cameras on buildings and cars and things like that. So you got to be careful about what you do. And tinted windows, I crack up. There's a lot that you can see in cars, and tinted windows almost, they don't guarantee privacy, but they give you a fair amount of privacy. But when somebody shines a light in your car, it may not just be your own moment that you're sharing with your significant other. It could be people out walking their dogs and things like that. I notice that in my neighborhood. And from time to time, with people, especially this time of the year, we're in the summer, with people recreating and spending more time outdoors because the weather is favorable. You never know what you may run across because people are a lot more cautious now of strange cars being in the neighborhood. There's probably a couple of people who don't have privacy at their place of living, and they're trying a few things out, especially when you see the car kind of rocking. But anyway, all those situations are things where people tend to, they've dove in. It's like jumping into the pool. There's that vastness, but these are people that have gone to the diving board, took the spring, and they've come off. So what if you're the strangers that are trying to be unstrangers and there is that hesitation? How do you get over that? How do you get over that hump where you're trying to engage in something with your partner, but you just keep seemingly running into something that's holding you up, that invisible wall, that break? I've always said you've got to be in conversation with this person. You really got to find out what's going on in their head. Because without that dialogue going on, then you're nowhere. And if you're the person who is being pursued, and you have to communicate with the person who's interested in you, what's going on in your head. And if you don't know, then it's time to get out the notepad and start just writing your thoughts down. Maybe you've had a dream somewhere and it's giving you access to what's going on in your subconscious. See, that's what dreams will do for you. I mean, you're all the players in your dreams. So if something's going on in there, remember, you're the director, you're the producer, you're all the actors. And if you can imagine being the camera that's following all this stuff along, so you can see it and you make it mean whatever you want it to mean. I've always been fascinated by people who analyze dreams because there's obviously hidden messages in there. I mean, I'm not an expert at it, but what I'm familiar with is knowing that you are all the persons in your dreams because you create the dialogue and the relationship between all the characters. And it's a way to play out all of these things. So you may have access to a lot of what you're feeling through, it's almost that you can live your life vicariously through your dreams. And when it comes to having a lover and let's say imagining this wall-banging sex, which is something you can do in your head, maybe it's not the face of the person that you're kind of connecting with, but it's just a way to experience it and imagine having something interesting to do. I believe in writing down your dreams, no matter what they are. Put it in your diary, your diary of dreams or your dream diary. And when you find something in there that, say, is pretty exciting to you, you might be a budding writer, for example, but you have some erotic, exotic thing that's going on there and you would like to try it out. I think that's something to bring to the relationship. It's something that you can toy with. But if you're having this experience that is keeping you from, say, being in relationship with your partner, being sexual with your partner, like I said, your dreams may be giving you access to that. And for what it's worth, think about that. Start to dissect those things and have that conversation with your partner. I say this, and I want to preface this on saying that, there are reasons why we're not sexual. I mean, if you, I'm talking to women now, if you experience some sort of vaginal dryness, that's something that you can talk to your doctor about. There is now a medication that it's prescription form. So for women that have a low libido, it's like a female Viagra. I haven't talked to anybody that's used something like that, but I'm going to put that out there to some friends that I know and find out if any of them have tried the medication. Now, on the side of the guys there who could be experiencing some sort of, libido inhibiting, maybe they're having problems with an erection or just general feelings like they can't be very sexual at the moment. Again, that's something you need to start talking to your partner about. Head to the doctor. Doctors are good. They like solving these kind of problems. And, why not utilize their skills? I'm going to take a break right here. I'm going to come back and talk about this some more. Stay tuned.
Still on the search of that one true love? On the limbo in this crazy world of dating, marriage, relationships? Well, listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Relationship Podcast, your one-stop podcast for everything about relationships.
Hello and welcome back to Golden State Media Concepts Sex Podcast. I'm your host, John Johnson. I want to do a little bit of medical information for you. When I left off that last segment, I was talking about doctors and allowing them to help solve some of your problems. Now, here's something that is specific to men, and it's called Peyronie's disease. And what it is, it's a curvature of the penis. So to describe it, there is the natural shape of the male organ. And if there has been, let's say, an injury, a trauma to the spongiosum, and that's the very spongy material that's around the outside of the penis, under the skin, and now the function of that is when blood rushes in, that's what creates an erection. In addition to the fact that there's a sphincter muscle that closes off and it prevents the blood from leaving. So by doing that, what that does, again, that's what causes the erection. And if, say, for example, and this is an example of how sometimes an injury could happen. Let's say a woman is on top, and as she comes up off the man's penis and then comes back down on it, if it doesn't go back into the vagina where there is a space for the penis to fit, let's say she lands on it, and it sort of gets a little bit of a fracture. It's, say, sprains it or something like that. Well, that spongy material on the side of the male penis can get injured in some way, shape, or form. And what tends to happen is as it's healing from the injury, the scar tissue that develops, it's called a plaque, and it forms in the penis. Now, as that plaque builds up, the penis will curve, or it'll bend, and this can cause painful erections. Now, curves in the penis can make sexual intercourse not only painful, difficult, or impossible, but it also begins with inflammation or swelling, which can become a hard scar. Now, the plaque that develops in this disease is not the same kind of plaque that develops in a person's arteries. Now, the plaque that's in this disease is benign, and it's not cancerous. It's not a tumor. And it's also not contagious or caused by any known transmittable disease. But when it happens and a man is unable to achieve or keep an erection firm enough for sexual intercourse, some men with this disease may have erectile dysfunction. And usually The men with the disease are referred to a urologist, and now that's a doctor who specializes in sexual and urinary problems. So that's a little bit of the information that goes on. Now, I'll tell you, how an erection occurs. Like I said, an erection occurs when blood flow increases into the penis, making it expand and become firm. So now, an erection requires a sequence of events. It begins with a sensory or mental stimulation, or both. Now, it could be physical contact, a sexual image, or a thought. Now, when the brain senses a sexual urge, it sends impulses to local nerves in the penis that cause the muscles of to relax. And as a result, blood flows through the arteries and it fills the spaces in the penis. And like I said, the spongy area, this is the area that gets damaged. And it feels like a water filling a sponge. And now the blood creates pressure and making the penis expand. Now, the erection generally ends after a climax or after a sexual urge is passed. So the muscles in the penis contract to stop the inflow of blood. Now, the veins open and the extra blood flows out and back into the body. So that's part of the sequence of events. Now, what causes Peyronie's disease, medical experts don't necessarily know the exact cause, but they have said it could be an acute injury to the penis, it could be chronic or repeated injury to the penis, and for some it could be an autoimmune disease, which is a disorder in which the body's immune system attacks its own cells and organs. Now, medical experts have said that hitting or bending the penis may injure the tissues inside, and a man could injure the penis during sex or athletic activity or an accident. And one of the sexual experiences that I was describing earlier, which is, say, when a woman is on top, and if she comes off the penis and lands on it, then that could cause a fracture. So just, ladies, be mindful of that. And when you're really kind of going at it and being vigorous, that know the limits, know how far that you can come up and how far you can come down, because if you come up and land on it wrong, it's going to be a painful experience for that guy to have. So furthermore, if you're a guy, or if you're a guy listening to this and you're wondering if you have Peyronie's disease, then you can go to your doctor. They can check that out. A urologist is trained specifically to diagnose something like this. They may do ultrasound, they may do x-rays, and specifically they're going to look for scar tissue. They may ask you about your family history, because there are certain people who may have a disposition to this, and by knowing something of the family history, they can put it all together. So it may be a physical exam, and then there may be imaging tests, like I said, an ultrasound or an x-ray, but these are done by professionals, so it's good to get an answer to this, and it can be treated. Now, there are non-surgical treatments or there is surgery, but the goal is to reduce the pain and restore and maintain the ability to have intercourse. Now, men who have experienced this may also experience shortening of the penis. So if that's something that you're dealing with, again, get to the doctor. They may have some very good solutions for your particular problem. Guys, that's just something that guys deal with. So, ladies, if you're listening to this, guys have talked about size and how long and things like that. And, women will tell you it's really not about the size. It's about the motion of the ocean. But when it comes to the idea of it being the deformity that may happen because of the disease, then sometimes just because of the visual of that can be very startling. Again, doctors have seen this. Take it to them. They can help you with that. And like I said, there's surgical and non-surgical treatments. The bottom line is to get help for your condition, and that way you can get past it and get on to better things. So if you want a little more information on that, there's lots that you can find on the internet, but I just wanted to give you a description of that. So ladies, if you've never seen that before and you happen to have come across the guy who has that, now maybe you can help him get treatment for that, because some guys, they're a little modest or they're embarrassed to get treatment. But I can imagine, if they want to be sexual, but not necessarily want to go to a doctor to get something like that taken care of. Or maybe they don't even know. Maybe they don't even know that that's something that can be handled. But if you're in that conversation with them, that might be the catalyst to get things to change. I'm going to take a break, and I'll come right back after this.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Hello, and welcome back to Golden State Media Concepts Sex Podcast. I'm your host, John Johnson. I've covered a number of things this podcast, and I'm going to touch on something else, younger men and older women. Now, that subject has been talked about a great deal, and being the sex podcast, obviously, we've talked about it in terms of sexual compatibility of younger men and older women. Women tend to reach a point in their life where, and it's statistically, they're talking about in their late 30s, early 40s, 50s, where women start to reach their sexual peak. Now, men reach their sexual peak in their late teens, 20s, on average. And women tend to do it a lot later in life. And also, as women become more comfortable with their bodies, and then they become more comfortable sexually. And it seems that it works this way, that a younger man and an older woman have a lot more compatibility, if not just for endurance, but the woman feeling more confident, and the younger man being a lot more virile and interested in being sexual, which is no slam on older men. It's just that is statistically what has happened, and we find that there is a lot to support that. So again, I've actually talked about younger men and older women in another podcast. Now what I'm going to transition to is, I started this podcast with talking about strangers becoming unstrangers. And that is unstrangers, meaning not strangers. One of the things to think about is, and this question has come up, and I've been asked this many times, and it has to do with not only the age different relationships, but and to each individual, they'll have their, what they're comfortable with in terms of the spread between the young man and the woman. And more recently, the question came to me about the difference. Now, like I said, each person has their own particular, what they're comfortable with. Some women, when you're in your 50s, you might be comfortable with a guy that could be in his late 30s or early 40s. But when a woman who's in her 60s, who is looking to say that maybe her life, because she's older, she might not be comfortable with a guy that has 15 years age difference. Maybe she'd be more comfortable with somebody that's 5 years or 4 years, maybe 3 years. And it has a lot to do, like I say, with each individual and what they're comfortable with. Sexual compatibility is what it is. And I think individuals have to work hard at being in tune with their partner, no matter what the age is. And when you find that sweet spot or that relationship in which you're really comfortable with, you can express yourself, you can have conversations, you can do all the fun things that are part of the relationship as well as the sex, then I think you got something that's great, and that's something worth investing in. But going back to this conversation about being unstrangers, when you think about the sexual compatibility between younger men and older women, and how that lands on the older woman as she ages, then it becomes something more personal to her, because she may feel that as she gets older, she's not going to feel attractive, and maybe worries about, what is this younger man going to do? Is he going to leave me? And that's why I talked about the point I just made about it being something of each individual has to decide what they're more comfortable with, being that there's a lot of variables out there. There are people who aren't necessarily looking for a long-term connection. Some people have decided that, they've been married and they're not necessarily looking for marriage. They're looking for companionship. And, the age difference really doesn't matter. But if you're looking for something that's more permanent or has the potential to be that, then that's something that may come more and more into play, especially as you get older. And you want to think of it as the partner in terms of when we're talking about permanence, you want to think of it as, the character of the individual that you're going to be connected with, and you're going to want them to stick around. So that obviously is something that has to be talked about between the two, whether there's an age difference or not. But again, primarily when we're talking about the comfort of age different relationships, each individual, usually the older person is the one that's probably going to make the decision about whether they're more comfortable with a younger person. Because as we see it, women are taking better care of themselves and they're living longer than men. So women has to also consider the pool of eligible men. And because men don't necessarily live as long as women do, maybe the guys who would be age appropriate just aren't there. And, women, you have to take that into consideration, especially when it comes to dating somebody who's going to be, say, considerably younger. You definitely want somebody who can go and do the things you want. So it becomes more of an interview about what type of integrity they have. Are they going to stick around? What kind of relationship they have? So you have to learn to ask those kinds of questions. And that being what it is, I think you will get more out of the relationship, but knowing what you need in terms of what's in a relationship, and also knowing that the likelihood of you finding a partner that might be, say, more age appropriate. If men are dying off sooner than women, then I think it really becomes incumbent upon the woman to be a little more flexible about, what she can have. Okay, so again, that really covers, we're talking about availability. So I'm going to spin to one other point, and it's to say that, believe it, women who are older, and I'm talking their 60s and 70s, are still very sexual. No question about it. I know that question gets asked from time to time because it's a natural question. I think a lot of people have assumed that because people get older, that sexuality really isn't an interest. Now, we talk about it from the standpoint of, okay, as we get older, maybe the capacity to be sexual isn't as vigorous as it were, say, maybe in younger years. And that's to be expected. That's kind of understood. At certain point in times in life, things tend to slow down. But I'm also here to suggest, based on what, the women that I've talked to, based on research that I know about, that people still tend to be sexual beings well into their 70s, 80s, and, beyond. So the capacity is there for a lot of women and men. And I think the desire to have that fulfilled because it is something that they enjoy still exists. So it's about finding partners, lovers, who will want to be there with you in that space. And you have to be willing to be vulnerable. I mean, if you have a steady partner, somebody that you've been with for a long time, then, the vulnerability, that relationship is something that you already have. But if you are starting over, then, and I know how that can be a daunting task for a lot of people, because if you've been in a relationship for a long time and are now finding yourself single and you're having to reconnect or find people that you feel that you're compatible with, that can seem like a very daunting task to take on. So it's really about getting back out there and doing it. There are lots of books out there that you can read about reintroducing yourself into the dating scene. And I've talked about it from time to time, dealing with podcasts on how to present a dating profile, how to date safely, but mostly on the idea of knowing something about what you want and going through the process. I mean, you only get better at it because you do it. And as nervous as it may make a lot of people, and I'm going to talk about just the safety part of it. I mean, that I've talked about separately, but I'm talking about getting out there and introducing yourself to people when you haven't been out there in a long, long time. So, and long it's relative. You know, if you're older and you've been in a long-term relationship and you no longer have that partner, then yeah, it's probably been quite a while since you've been out there. So reintroducing yourself to the dating scene means that you're going to run into a lot of people that may not be compatible with you for a number of reasons. You know, if you've gotten to a place where you're comfortable with who you are, or maybe quote unquote set in your ways, you may have to be flexible on that, because as we get older, then we do tend to be less flexible about a lot of things. But sometimes it's really a good idea to revisit that. It gives you a chance to do things a little differently. But again, that all has to do with knowing yourself. Now, I'll probably take this particular subject up in another podcast, but right now I'm kind of at the limit of my time here, so I'm going to have to wrap this up. But I do want to thank you for listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Sex Podcast. I'm your host, John Johnson.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Sex Podcast, part of the GSMC Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcasts on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type in GSMC to find all of our shows from the GSMC Podcast Network. From sex and relationships to health and wellness, life and happiness, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's episode of the Golden State Media Concepts Sex Podcast.